let's jump in, hey?
All right, let's do it. Part 3.
So today we're doing part 3 of how to get faster. And today we're looking at strength training and how you can use strength training to help build speed. So there are 2 components of strength training specifically that you want to be incorporating. We just call them type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is really heavy and slow, and type 2 is a bit more explosive, and it's about building explosive power and acceleration. Type 1 is super heavy and really slow. And the idea with it is 2 things, either building more muscle mass and also it's both things really. It's building more muscle mass and also recruiting more muscle fibers, because when you're using a muscle, it doesn't necessarily mean that your nervous system is recruiting all the muscle fibers. It's generally only recruiting a percentage of them. So yes, training heavy and slow will help you run faster, and no, it just won't make you bulkier and slower. That is a myth. So don't believe that. It's not true. So these are classically the squats, the deadlifts, the calf raises, and the lunges. And for those of you in Runner's Playground, you will have seen them programmed into your strength training days a million times, because they essentially make up the bulk of your strength training as a runner, because they're working on the major muscle groups that you need as a runner. And generally the rep range will be low. So it'll be about 3 to 7, 3 to 8 reps and 3 to 5 sets if we're working on specifically building strength. And that will have a really nice carryover into speed. You'll also see, though, on your strength days, there are accessory exercises, which are generally in a bit of a higher rep range. So 8 to 15 reps, generally sort of those exercises you're doing 10 to 15 times. And those are less about building pure strength and more about also building, there's more of a muscle mass focus with that. So you're actually building more muscle mass just by moving more weight. So slightly different rep ranges for slightly different focuses. However, specifically when we're talking about heavy strength training for speed development, it's generally in that low rep range. So that 3 to 7 rep range or 3 to 8 rep range. And it's generally heavy. So 75 to 90% of your 1 rep max. And it's generally slow. So 3 to 5 seconds is actually a very long time. Yeah, and we have a particular focus, particularly as runners, on the eccentric phase, so the downward phase of the movement. So as you're coming down into a squat or coming down into a deadlift, because we're interested in, can you control the muscle as it's lengthening? Because a lot of running injuries are during the lengthening phase of a muscle. And time under tension is what will build you more strength and more power. So yeah, rest time is a hard one to wrap your head around as a runner, because it does feel like a long time. And it can be anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes or even up to 6 minutes if you're going super heavy, or even longer. So I find this is where a lot of runners don't wait long enough in the rest time, because they're just not used to that type of training.
Definitely. I know for myself, when I started doing proper strength training to help improve my running, it took me a long time to actually do it properly, because I'd get bored and I'd go, I don't feel that tired, let's just go again, which really defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do. So hence why we wanted to really deep dive into explaining this properly and explaining the why you're doing things, to help motivate you to take the rest that you need. Because even if you feel great, take the rest, because it means that on the next set you can actually do it properly. You can actually lift heavy enough and you can go slow enough. As Mike said, 3 to 5 seconds is really slow. Would also recommend you either have a clock with the seconds ticking in front of you that you can see, or maybe have some sort of interval timer beeping the seconds for you, so you can actually do that 3 to 5 seconds. Because guarantee, when you're lifting a heavy weight, it's going to be slower than you think it is. So it's good to have something external really forcing you to keep that tempo slow.
Yeah. I also like with the rest time to either do a light corrective. So one that I personally give a lot of clients is like just a side plank activation. It's not about holding it for a long time. It's just like a 5-10 second activation, because a lot of people, when their core muscles get tired, they tend to recruit through their neck and things. So it's just another way to re-wake those muscles up. And I also check my heart rate in the rest time, and I don't allow myself to begin the next set until my heart rate has dropped to a certain level. And I'm always surprised how long it actually takes for that to happen.
Yeah, definitely. Because you feel like you're not really working that hard when, if you think about these sessions when you're going heavy, the number of total reps isn't that high. Like if you look at, for example, here, you could be doing 4 reps over 4 sets. So it's 16 reps in total, which really doesn't feel like very much. But when you're going heavy and slow, it is. So you actually work very hard and your heart rate does get up there. I quite often do various mobility exercises as well, and the rest is another good one. Or for me personally, my foot strength isn't very good, so that's something I've been working on. So I might just sit there and, try to lift my big toe in my rest break, just something that I'm going to do it anyway, so I may as well fill the rest somehow. Yeah, awesome. Anything else to add to our first type of strength training?
I don't think so. Do you? I suppose the only other thing I would say is that remember you're doing strength training to support your running. So the idea isn't to have DOMs. I think that's a very common misconception, is that you haven't worked hard enough unless you can't walk down the stairs for 3 days, which is actually really counterproductive and not recommended at all. So, it's recommended sometimes if you're really testing, but for most of the time, you don't want to be that sore after training because you have to run the next day, because running is still your main form of training if you're a runner. So don't work it that hard. And I think the other thing is a lot of people shy away from a lot of these lifts because they are quite technical and are quite challenging. But I think it's better to do standing compound lifts than just use the machines all the time. And yes, the machines are generally safer, but, I think you get a lot more out of doing squats and deadlifts and actually learning how to lift properly.
Yeah, definitely. And actually how to feel and control and move your body better as well. Like when you're using a free weight, it's much more obvious than a machine if you have imbalances. So if one side is stronger or weaker than the other. Obviously, everyone will probably have that to a certain degree, but if it's extreme, if you're holding a barbell, you'll notice that one side lifts higher than the other, whereas a machine, you can really get away with that. So another good reason to use, various forms of free weights, could be barbell, dumbbell, kettlebells, whatever it might be. And if you are unsure, you can always film yourself doing these exercises, send them in to us. We can have a look and help work and develop your technique. And do it that way as well, so that we can get you feeling really comfortable doing these movements and feeling really safe doing them as well.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing I would add is don't forget calf raises. Slow, heavy calf raises are so crucial, particularly for any runner, particularly given the muscles below the knee are the ones that decondition the quickest as we age. And remember, a lot of this slow training is also for tendon strength, and tendons get stronger by time under tension and really slow training. So particularly for Achilles tendon strength and as an extension of that down into the whole of the plantar fascia and all the way up the calf, slow, heavy calf raises are really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. And tendons, oh my God, if you end up with a tendon injury, they take so long to heal. So it's much better just staying on top of it. Speaking potentially from experience with that one. Then we have our second type. So almost the exact opposite of what we were explaining before with the type 1 was our heavy, slow, long rest, low rep type training. This, we're talking explosiveness. So we're really going for acceleration and total force production. So some examples, things such as your kettlebell swings, Olympic lifts, your plyo training. Plyo could consist of things such as our box jumps, squat jumps, bounding, jumping for distance, high skips, running drills, skipping, all those sorts of things. The weight is going to be much lighter than type 1. So we're not going for really heavy and slow here. We're going for, it's still moderately heavy when you're doing these types of exercises, but we're really trying to get as quick as possible with every single movement. When we're talking plyos, there's generally two types. So we've got our explosiveness. So for examples, this is the box jumps, squat jumps for distance type exercises, or on the other hand, endurance. So endurance plyometrics is more of our sprints, burpees, skipping, exercises that you're doing repeatedly for a longer period of time. So if you think about running is obviously an endurance, very repetitive type movement. So think along the lines of your endurance plyometrics. However, we also want to train the explosiveness, because the more explosive and more powerful we can be off the ground, the further we can get with every step, and therefore the faster we can run. So it's important to be able to train both, so we can get as fast and powerful as possible, but also actually have the endurance in our bodies to be able to do that for a long period of time. When it comes to plyometrics training, we don't want to overdo it. So you'll see in your strength training program, it tends to be sprinkled throughout. So your type 1 is the majority of where you'll spend your time, and type 2 is definitely important and has its place, but we don't want to overdo it. Overdoing essentially leads to things such as your stress fracture injuries, your overuse and injuries, particularly when you think that we are doing a lot of running as we're training to be runners. So it's really great to sprinkle through, but don't be spending half an hour every single day doing plyos training.
I think you made a really interesting point about COVID before and the increase in the injuries that you were seeing.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, like, I know some of us are still in lockdown. However, when lockdown struck the first time and we were all inside and all the gyms closed everywhere, strength training obviously had to change to accommodate that, because people didn't have weights that they could have access to anymore. So a lot of the programming that I saw gyms do moved to a lot of plyo work to try to compensate for the fact that we couldn't use weights, but maybe we could train to be more explosive to still get a good solid workout in. So a lot of gyms were doing things like squat jumps, lunge jumps, burpees every single day in their training programs. And as a result, the injuries in terms of such as plantar fascia or stress fractures in the foot, all those types of injuries were actually, that I was seeing, were really, really high, because people went from doing not a huge amount of plyos to basically every single day to try to find some form of training they can do. So it's definitely important to not overdo this type of training, is basically the point of the story.
That is how I broke my foot too. Was doing too much metric training with running training.
Yeah.
So yes, I think, very important to realize that it'll be mostly type 1 with some parts of type 2.
Yeah, definitely. And also to keep in mind that depending what your running week looks like, there might be some weeks that you go, actually, you know what, I'm doing a lot of speed work with my running, so maybe I don't need plyos this week. Or maybe a week is more endurance focused with your running type sessions, so that's a great week to scatter in some plyometrics type training.
And you can still train this type 2 explosive training without plyometrics. So, for example, I love kettlebell swings, kettlebell snatches, Olympic lifts. I personally hate Olympic lifts. They're really hard. I
really like them. They're really fun.
Better at it than I am, and also just with work, I don't like the wrist extension in a lot of them, but that's just a personal preference thing, and I just got to sucker it up. I should probably do a bit more Olympic lifting, but I use a lot of kettlebells for a lot of this explosive training, and that isn't plyometric because we're not jumping.
Yeah, definitely. That sort of stuff is really, really good. And when it comes to rest, again, take your time, take proper rest with all this type of training, because you're working your body pretty hard. And particularly if it's something that you don't do very much of, important to take, a couple of minutes rest in between sets. And some action examples.
Nice.
So I think that's pretty much everything. It's a bit of a whirlwind tour of taking you guys through what week 1 was, the type of sessions you can incorporate for speed. Week 2 being technique pointers to focus on, and obviously this week being strength focusing. And personally, I think this week's really great in that it explains to a degree why we program the strength training sessions the way we do. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense. There is a method behind all the madness. They're not just random numbers thrown in there, random rest periods. There is a reason to everything. If you're ever unsure, let us know. Happy to answer. And definitely if you're not really sure about strength training or your technique, because I know a lot of runners haven't done a lot of strength training before, definitely feel free to film yourself. If it's at home, you're doing the home gym style, or if you're in the gym doing that version of the program, we're very happy to give you feedback and let you know and give you some pointers for things to work on.